Hey everybody, what's going on? Hope you're having a good weekend so far. Just thought I would do a little video here. So I do a lot of talk about the medical repercussions of transition and the seriousness of that. But I wanted to do a short video to kind of address some of the more aesthetic changes that you might see and kind of sort of like a little message to younger people who are maybe in the beginning stages of transition and questioning it, or people who are considering detransition. Some things that will be more permanent versus things that might change, and also sort of the emotional things that you can expect. Again, I can only speak from my own experience, but I'd like to share that. So, yeah, let's get into it. One thing that I'm sure everybody will kind of get pretty quickly, whether you're about to transition or considering detransition, is voice change. So, as you may notice, my voice is kind of a little scratchy, a little deeper. I kind of sound, I think, like I'm coming down from helium, but I have a deeper voice. I don't. My voice. I wish I had more recordings of my voice so I could maybe do a side to side comparison. My voice before testosterone was actually very high and um, typical of female people. And that coupled with the way that I speak, I had a very female way of speaking and female way of communicating with my voice. So when I took testosterone, my tone changed and my vocalization changed, but my speech pattern didn't really change that much. So I feel that a lot of people, a lot of females who take testosterone, when we have that change in our voice, we don't change the pattern of how we speak very much. And that's something that as you get older, I think is harder and harder to change. Kind of like learning a new language gets more challenging when you're older. If that's something that you are hoping to change, say you are starting transition and you are hoping to be able to communicate in a way that people will assume that you're male more frequently, I think that considering speech pattern is a very good way to look at it, because people will uh, sort of pick up on those social cues as well from how you speak. So, for instance, a good example, you'll notice I use a lot of ums and ers and I use a lot of space too, because women are conditioned to speak a certain way. I can get into the whole feminist take on that as well, but I probably won't do that right now. But there's a different way that women speak versus how men speak. So that way is conditioned into us from a pretty young age. And those patterns will transcend the tone of your voice and make people question you a little bit more frequently, I believe. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that while your voice will change in how it sounds, your pattern may not change. And so you'll have this combination of different voice but same pattern, and more than likely it'll actually draw more attention to you in a way. I know that's something that's uncomfortable and that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge because it can often be seen as a downside. I choose to just sort of use that as a way of having confidence in myself, of knowing even though I have been conditioned to speak a certain way, I also feel that speaking in a more natural way for me is better than spending that extra energy and time in changing those patterns. I did put forth energy in the past to try and speak differently, and to sort of cut off my extra ums and ers and likes and work on the vocabulary that I use and speaking with my hands in a certain way. All of that plays into it. I worked on that and I tried to change that, and it was very hard. And I realized that it's less concerning to me that people question me on my voice, because I will then, in conversation, work through that with them versus worrying too much about the impression that I'm leaving on them just by the vocabulary that I'm using. I don't know if that makes much sense, but I hope it does, because that's something that I think is important, is to consider that even though you take testosterone, your voice will change. That's not going to instantly check that box and make people believe that you are male just by your voice changing, because there are differences still. Another thing that is talked about all the time, of course, is hair. So you will get more body hair, and it will probably not be as attractive as you may want it to be. Everybody is different. Every body is different. And I cannot emphasize that enough, that, I've met so many detransitioners that have been on testosterone for roughly the same amount of time as me, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And we all have kind of a different physical reaction to it. So that's something to keep in mind, is, you may see this amazing trans man on YouTube who's got this great sexy beard and got it really going on, and his arm hair is fantastic and sexy and not at all like a 70s movie. And, and he's got like chest hair that's like just kind of filled in perfectly. That's great for him. Cool, more power to him if that's his choice, and he's a grown adult and has all of the information he needs to make those choices. Cool, more power to him. That being said, it's really important to have realistic goals, and this is one of those things that it's hard to set a goal because your body's different than his body. So you don't really know exactly what to look for and what changes are going to happen. It is, I think, important to look at your family history. That will definitely give you a little bit of insight. I know, for instance, my hair growth and hair loss has been similar to my father's side of the family, the men in my father's side of the family, more so than my mother's, even though I believe, scientifically speaking, there is, I don't want to necessarily call it a theory because it might be proven, but there is the correlation of gaining like hair loss through the females, your mother's side of the family, the men on your mother's side of the family. That hair loss pattern is supposedly the pattern that you'll inherit. I'm not super up to date on the information there, so I apologize. I definitely will look into that a little bit more, because I feel like that's important to know. But that is something that I believe we should all take into account, is you may be starting testosterone and looking at other transitioning people as your goal for, how you want to look aesthetically. But that's not very realistic, because your DNA is different than theirs. So keeping that in mind. Also, for detransitioners, that's one thing that is really unfortunate, is that a lot of us have body hair growth that becomes unwanted, or becomes something of a trigger for dysphoria that we have after detransitioning. For example, if you re-identify as a woman after being on hormones for a while, and you are growing facial hair, it might be a little anxiety provoking to have to shave every day. I know it is for me. Believe it or not, I grow a lot of facial hair and I shave every day. I know that there are women out there who grow facial hair and they are still women. There are women who grow facial hair without having gone through the process of transition. It's just how their body works. I totally respect that. But for my body, for my choice of how I take care of my body, I choose to shave because it makes me feel better about myself. It also makes navigating my employment a little bit easier. But that's also something I could go on about with societal structures and how we expect women to be hairless. I do find issue with that. And, if it were not the expectation that women be hairless, who knows? Maybe I would be more comfortable with not shaving and growing my facial hair out. But given the situation that I'm in, I find that to be the most convenient way to go about it. Now, that being said, I think a lot of women who go on hormones are not, I don't think that we are, well, I know we are not prepared for grooming that kind of way. So I think one thing that really helped me was, and it was kind of awkward, but asking men about how they shave and having a man teach me, a grown adult female, having them teach me how to shave. It was a difficult thing to do, and I fully support anyone's choice to do what they will with their body. If you choose not to go down that route, good for you. If you choose to shave your face, it's something that I think a lot of women will have difficulty with, especially if you have things like sensitive skin, if you have acne, which is common with testosterone. All of that is going to make it difficult. But finding the right products and taking care of your skin and taking care of yourself through that process is really key. And just knowing that that's something you will probably have to address if you are planning to go on testosterone. And if you're planning to detransition and you're in a position like I am where it's easier to not have facial hair, I think that's something that we really need to address. Again, I understand that women should have the right to grow facial hair. I'm not arguing that. But if people are in a situation where it makes it easier to not have facial hair, I think that we should be prepared for that and talk about it. So I'm really bad at shaving. I cut myself pretty much every time. And one thing I've noticed is just have good moisturizer on hand. Don't be afraid to take care of your skin. The beauty industry is ripe with all these products that they want to sell you. And so it is really hard to get through all of the junk that they're trying to sell you because they're telling you, your body is not perfect and here's how to fix it. And that's not what I'm trying to tell you whatsoever, is like, go out and buy all the products. But just finding good quality products can be helpful. Good moisturizer is really difficult to find. But things with shea butter and coconut oil can be good. Coconut oil, I think, clogs your pores a little bit, but if you use it on the facial hair, sometimes that can help with like the shaving process. Anyway, so that's my shtick about that is shaving is difficult. I personally, if I could go another day, like one more day in my life without having facial hair, I would be so happy. Just one extra day of not worrying about it. And I've done laser treatments as well. That's something that some people choose to do. Again, I am of the opinion that in this regard, people deserve autonomy and they deserve the right to make that choice for themselves. And I made that choice because, again, of my career. It's a little bit easier for me to work with parents of children without them having to question me, and it just makes things easier for me. And I am not in a place where I'm confident enough to have those conversations with the people that I work with. So I went and I had a laser treatment done. And I was very, very fortunate that my very dear friend paid for it for me as a Christmas gift. If that were not the case, I probably would not have gotten it done because it is really goddamn expensive. It's expensive, it's painful, it's awkward, it's time consuming, it's all of the nasty things. And you know, it's not, I don't think it's something that necessarily people have to get done. But for some of us, if we have the opportunity, I think that it can ease some stress, which is good for some people. Now, as far as like body hair goes, I personally choose not to shave most of my body hair because it would be too much work. If I'm getting to a point where I'm intimate with someone, it's just easier for me to tell them what to expect and hope for the best than to worry about landscaping. So that's, again, another personal choice you have to make, and something you should be prepared for is you're gonna have fucking hair on your booty. Like, you're gonna have hair, like, all up everywhere, and it's going to be kind of gross a lot of the time. It's going to be itchy. Even, I think, if you're used to, like, not shaving your legs and not shaving body hair, hair changes with testosterone use. It does become more coarse, usually becomes a little more dark. And so you might have to deal with, like, ingrown hairs more frequently, and you're going to deal with, like, more torso body hair and things like that. So that's stuff to prepare for. I do choose to groom certain areas occasionally depending on what I'm wearing. But again, I don't really focus too much on that. It's just easier to not do that. And I live in a climate where I'm covered up most of the time anyway, so it's like, what's the point? Yeah, and then hair loss. So you'll see, I've pointed this out before because I'm really self-conscious about it, and the best way to get over being self-conscious is put it out on the internet. I have hair loss up in this area. I've got some nice widow's peaks going. I used to have a little bit more of a rounded shape here. I did still have a fairly large forehead, so that's just kind of, this is how my face looks. But yeah, your hair loss. Some people on testosterone who've detransitioned have said that their hair loss has stopped. Some people have said that their hair loss has even reversed a little bit, where they've gotten some new growth. Some people have said that there's been no change. Some people have even said that their hair loss has continued. Again, I think this is a situation where it's kind of on the individual and your genetics. I don't think there's a guarantee one way or the other. I do think that you're likely to experience hair loss on testosterone if you're on it for more than a few years. I think that's just something that will probably happen. But again, no guarantees. For my own experience, my hair loss has stopped, which is great for me. But I've not experienced a lot of regrowth. I've gotten like a couple of baby hairs back, like I think it was like a year and a half ago, so a little bit after I had stopped hormones. I started getting some baby hairs around my face. So I got a little bit of regrowth maybe, but it wasn't like filling in. And that's another realistic expectation kind of moment where you got to be like, okay, even if I get regrowth, it probably isn't going to be a full regrowth of hair. It's not going to come back magically. And that's something that can cause a lot of people distress. So that's something to keep in mind if you are beginning testosterone, is you may think like, oh, it's going to take a long time before that happens, and I'm going to be cool with it, and if I stop tea, it's just going to stop and come back. We need to have realistic expectations. I will fully admit I had unrealistic expectations when I began testosterone. I thought I would not experience hair loss for a very long time. I thought, maybe like 10 years, like as I get older, it would happen. Hair loss for me started probably about a year to 2 years on tea. I can't give a specific time, but it happened pretty soon. And I was losing insane amounts of hair. It was kind of scary. And just keep in mind, like, you're doing a really dramatic thing to your body. So having dramatic results is kind of to be expected a little bit. And, maybe that won't happen to you. I hope it doesn't. Because for me, that was a lot more traumatic than I expected it to be. I thought that when I lost hair, it wouldn't be a big deal because it's just hair. It's just the outside, right? Like, what's inside is most important. And I still believe that. But there are certain things about the way that we present ourselves that are tied to our identity as, walking soul carriers or whatever you want to call us. And I think it's really important to be able to recognize yourself in the mirror, even as you change. And when that stops, it gets to be very difficult. When you start looking in the mirror and you say, I don't know who this person is. I can't see anything that looks familiar anymore. And it's a confusing process and it's hard to get used to. And so for me, hair loss was actually a lot more difficult than I was expecting. And it is a big part of what made me question if these changes were things that I would actually be comfortable with long term. That may seem shallow. I'm going to just be frank with you. I don't care how shallow it seems. I really had a hard time with the changes that were happening to my body. And even though I acknowledge that my body is just something that takes me through the world, and my actual experiences in the world are what are valuable, I still also care about my body, and I still care about how I look to a certain degree. And having those changes happen so rapidly and without realistic expectations, it was very traumatic for me. So I think understanding that changes that happen are probably not going to happen on your timetable, and they're probably not going to happen in the same way as other people, and they're probably not going to happen in the same way that you're envisioning from the start. That's all really important. Some things to keep in mind too are the way that we carry ourselves is different. Body language is really different between men and women. So the way that women carry themselves physically and walk and talk, the way that we communicate with our bodies is different. And again, kind of like speech pattern is something that is pretty ingrained in us and is really challenging to change. I tried very hard to change my gait and change how I walked, and I actually had some success with that. But again, it took a lot of effort and energy to consciously be aware of that all the time, and that's something to keep in mind if you are beginning hormone therapy and hoping to present yourself in a certain way. You're going to, if that's something you want to change, it's going to be a pretty consistent, conscious effort. It's not something that's going to come naturally to you. Um, maybe after a long time it'll be more natural, but it's going to take a long time to get there. So yeah, I just think that that's something also to keep in mind, is that that doesn't just change overnight. It doesn't change with hormones. It's something that's ingrained in us socially and culturally too. So those changes are things that you're going to have to make consciously, and you're going to have to put the work in. Now, specifically for detransitioned women, I know there's a lot of fear for people, probably more so younger people, who have been sort of involved in transition through some very formative years. There's some fear around detransitioning, and how do you do that without becoming a specimen, without drawing more attention to yourself? And I wish I had a solid answer for that, because it's a question I've seen from people considering detransition, where they're like, how do I do this without people noticing? And I think you kind of can't, but you can find a way to emotionally deal with that awkward stage. And I wish it were easier to I wish it were easier to actually do, but I think having confidence in yourself is really important, and recognizing that you are the one who has to live with your body full time. And if you are making the choice to detransition, and you are doing that for your own betterment, then that's your choice to make, and that anyone who questions you, or the situations you find yourself in where it's awkward and it's hard to communicate with people about that, that all is more temporary than the consequences of your choices. And so if you're making a healthy choice, in the long term, that's going to be better for you, even if you have to have those awkward moments. Hope that makes sense. Again, I know that doesn't really help. So I would say finding support is really important. Finding people who understand your journey. Definitely getting involved in the detransition community is very important. From a certain angle. I don't want to advocate getting neck deep into anything right now, because I think that when you start to detransition, you're very vulnerable to other people's agendas, and you're very vulnerable to becoming politicized for other reasons. And those are choices that you get to make also. I know for me, I kind of fell very heavy into radical feminism for a little while, to a point that was actually kind of unhealthy for me, and caused me a lot more grief and stress. And so I ended up kind of pulling back from that, realizing like, okay, I'm going from one extreme to another extreme, and that maybe I'm doing that because of the comfort of having an extreme polarized viewpoint, not for the right reasons, and not in a mindset of de-stressing my current situation. So I think, really putting focus on yourself right now is going to be important, and not letting yourself get too involved or invested in current affairs that may or may not be using you. And maybe, that's not to say that all these groups are bad and all the people involved in these groups are bad. I am not making, or I'm not trying to make all-encompassing statements. But I do think it's good to give yourself some time and some space, and hold off on getting involved too heavily in very many groups. But that being said, also socially, finding some detransitioned women who you connect with just for some emotional support can be good. And finding, it's really hard, but finding a therapist who can or tries to understand you is really important, who hopefully doesn't have an agenda to push you one way or the other. Again, I super empathize with that challenge because I still have not found a therapist who isn't trying to push me one way or the other. I don't think it's impossible, but it's definitely hard. And so that's one thing that I think is a good investment of your time, is finding, a good healthcare team, good mental health care team, and a good social circle where you have people who actually understand your journey and can just be there for emotional support without trying to get you on board with any particular thing. And those are things that you will probably struggle with finding at first, because it's really difficult to discern for yourself, especially if you were heavily involved with the trans community. It can be really hard to believe people, and it can be really hard to, I think, find honesty in people without getting super involved in whatever their agenda is. And unfortunately, this debate between radical feminism and the trans rights agenda, or activism, however you want to put TRAs, those two sides are really going at it. And I feel like a lot of times detransitioners, we kind of come out of it in the middle, and we sort of get pushed and pulled from one side to the other. There's a lot of guilt tripping. There's a lot of expectation of us. And for people who are just coming out into that journey of detransition, that's a lot of pressure. And I think it's kind of abhorrent to expect detransitioned people to choose one side or the other when we've sort of had a foot in each court, in a sense of, like, let us make our own choices, especially at first. And even if those choices may be confusing to understand, we've had a very unique experience with transgender identity that I think a lot of us, obviously each one of our stories is unique to ourselves, but also our experiences socially and politically oftentimes have been different than either side of this debate. So while I think it's really important to listen to detransitioners, it's also important to give us space. It's also important to understand that we are getting a lot of pressure from both sides. And for a lot of us, it's hard. I obviously have a lot of strong feelings about the transgender community. But even for me, there are things that are really difficult for me to say, like, that I hate that community. I'm not going to ever say I hate trans people or I hate the whole of the community, because there's a lot of things from that side that that I've experienced in ways that I think the radical feminist side may not understand from an empathetic viewpoint, and vice versa. So, that being said, giving yourself space as a detransitioner is really important and crucial to you being able to live your life more independently, and being able to be more critical in ways that are healthy for yourself. That's a lesson I had to learn kind of a hard way. And I'm still kind of working on that, to be honest. There are biases that I've developed for and against each side that are not really based on things I truly believe. And I'm working to dismantle that and kind of figure out what it is I actually believe and figure out the way I actually think. And it sounds so fucked up, like that you can't think for yourself. But, and I'm not saying that in a way to discredit or insult detransitioners. Please understand. I'm not trying to suggest that we can't think for ourselves. I'm suggesting that it's hard to think for yourself when you're getting it from both sides. You know what I mean? So yeah, just defend yourself. Put up boundaries and say, I'm not getting involved in this right now because I got to take time and space for myself and for the journey that I'm taking. That's good, I think. That's really important. Emotionally, it's probably going to be hard to find community, and it's going to be hard to find people other than other detransitioners who really understand where you're coming from. And that's not to say that there aren't people who try and who will genuinely listen to you and care about what you're going through. But it may take time to develop those relationships. So be patient. It's going to be hard. You're probably... I'm going to say something and it's going to sound so disheartening. But I promise I'm going to follow up with some positives. When I first came out as detransitioned, I was really angry. I let my anger feed itself with more anger constantly. So I was just bitter and angry. And I still have some residual feelings of bitterness, as you will see on my Twitter feed. But I put so much energy into my anger. And it was not healthy. And I knew it wasn't healthy, but I had to feel that way for a little while. So I understand that when you come out, you may have that feeling of anger. And it may be that you have to feel that way for a little while. You also will probably feel alone, even though there's awesome amounts of detransition people out here waiting to talk to you and waiting to support you and just tell you that you were loved. It's really lonely. Yeah. And it's hard. When you lose friends and you lose a community, it breaks your heart. And you feel like you're never going to feel accepted or loved or understood again. But you will. You will. I promise that if you're detransitioning because you want to make healthier choices and because you are trying to focus on yourself and make yourself better in a way that isn't impacted by the opinions and agendas of other people, you are making a good choice, and it will get easier and it will get less lonely, and it won't stop being hard, but you will become stronger, and you will find ways to understand yourself better, which will make it such a beautiful thing that you came out into this new chapter of your life. I'm just going to talk about myself for a minute because I'm selfish or whatever, but yeah, after my anger spiral when I detransitioned, I felt like if I didn't have the anger, I didn't have boundaries, and I didn't have a proper grounding. And that's not true. It took a lot of loving my body and working through trauma and working through dysphoria to appreciate my body. And appreciating my body helps me appreciate myself. Because I think I'd heard and regurgitated all the time, your body is beautiful, love yourself. And it's definitely easier said than done. And it also, I think, sometimes it sounds really shallow. It sounds really surface level, right? To like love your body. Like, it sounds like just let go, like it's so easy. Let go of all of the connections between your feelings about your body and your feelings about yourself. And it's not that simple. But I soon had to kind of face the issue of having medical problems with my endometriosis. And that, I think that's something that kind of kickstarted in me a different view of my body and myself. And that's not something that every person is going to have as quickly. And I don't want to say that with too much self-confidence in the sense that, like, I'm done. I did it. Because that's definitely not the case. I am totally still working on my shit. Lots and lots to work through. But I think that gave me a completely, like, different foothold on what my body means to me. And I really sincerely hope that nobody who's seeing this video has to go through that, because it is a really painful experience, and it's really, really hard to love your body when it's falling apart like that. But it also makes you appreciate the strength that you have. And just by detransitioning, even without suffering medical issues, just by detransitioning, your body is so strong to have gone through those things that those choices that you made, and to keep carrying you through this. And it's important to recognize that your body is going to continue to change, and it's also going to continue to stay the same in certain ways. And that the changes don't erase the trauma or the dysphoria or the anxiety. Changes aren't going to make that stuff go away. Sometimes they'll make it worse. And, sometimes it makes it better. But I don't think it makes it go away completely. There's probably people out there who disagree with me, and that's fair. If it worked for you and you're happy, then I support you, and I'm grateful for you that you've had that experience. But I've known a lot of women who did not have that experience. And I just want to say, like, detransitioners out there, you're doing a really, really hard thing, and it's not going to be over very soon, but you are strong, and you were strong enough to get through this. And as long as you are making the best choices for yourself, then you are making the right choice. And I hope that people who are considering taking hormones also take into account that there is a possibility at some point you may want to detransition. I know when I first started hormones, that was the last thing that crossed my mind. I could have never thought, I'm going to want to stop this at some point. I figured, like, this is the end choice. This is the thing that's going to change my life, and I'm going to be happy with this decision for the rest of my life. And so I'm not gonna try and convince anybody that that all or nothing perspective is kind of wrong. But I will say, like, it doesn't hurt to prepare. Um, best case scenario, you are happy on hormones and you do have a better life. That's fantastic for you. Um, but on the off chance that you make this choice and then later decide to detransition, I think it's important to be prepared for the hardships that come along with that choice. Um, there are also a lot of really great cathartic things that happen. Um, but yeah, I think it's good to be prepared. Uh, and the trans community now um, argues a lot that you shouldn't even consider it. You shouldn't think like that. Um, I think that's kind of encouraging self-harm in a way, because they are encouraging restricting your options. They are encouraging that you not prepare yourself for the physical toll that this will take on you, whether you stay or you detrans. Like, they are encouraging that you ignore things, and to me, I think that's dangerous. So I would suggest that people who are choosing transition just prepare just in case. And that's not to say you have to consider, like, what am I trying to say? I'm not trying to suggest that you live your life on the fence. If you've made a choice and you want to stick with that choice, more power to you. If you're, a grown-ass adult and you're making as well-informed a choice as you can make, that's you. You get to make that choice. But I do think that understanding that there are people like me out there who also went through that process of thinking that that was the ultimate choice and the final choice, and then came out of it with a completely different perspective. I think it's important to know that, and that we exist. Maybe choices are not always permanent. So yeah, that's my spiel. I may go into kind of like more social things next time, because there's some weird social stuff when you are going from like early transition to later transition to detransition. It's interesting. I hope this hasn't been too much of a bummer. Like I said, like, I think that, people who are considering detransition, you are so strong just to be thinking about that choice. Considering it's so discouraged to consider that, like, just the fact that you're giving it thought is really is a really great thing, because it means that you are being critical of what you do with yourself and who you listen to, and that's really important. And if you choose not to detransition, if you're like, I'm considering it, but I don't think I'm going to do it, like, for me at least, and I think for a lot of detransition people, we're not going to, like, stop caring about you just because you decided not to go through with it. I think everyone has the right to question things, even if they end up staying with the same choice that they made. Yeah, I hope that you are all doing well, especially in this time that we are having. I'm not going to acknowledge too much of what all is going on, because that would be a completely other video. But I will say, Minneapolis is my second home. I actually lived there for about a decade, and my heart goes out to the people there. I am truly devastated by the way things are turning out over there, and appalled by the actions of the individuals who are taking away from the greater point of what those movements are trying to make. And yeah, love and support to the people who are working to make changes for the better in not only in Minneapolis but all over this country. Obviously, we need to make some big changes, and yeah, I would say thoughts and prayers, but that's such bullshit, right? But in any case, it weighs heavily on me, and so I hope that everyone out there is staying safe and not giving up and taking care of themselves and their families and their communities. This is a really hard time in our country. So stay safe. Much love to everybody out there, and wear a mask, wash your damn hands. Take care.